And now I just invite Dr. Sriparna Pathak, who is going to be the moderator for our next session, another interesting session discussing the neighborhood challenges that India faces, from Pakistan and China. And we have an amazing panel of experts. Dr. Sriparna Pathak will be introducing all of them. Dr. Pathak, she is a senior fellow with Usanas Foundation, and she is one of the best experts on China in India these days. She is teaching at General University. Over to you, Dr. Pathak.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pandya, and I'm really honored to be part of this platform, and I'm glad that this entire dialogue is happening. So after this extremely interesting session, we proceed to the next session, which is also definitely a very interesting one, because we'll be talking about neighborhood challenges from Pakistan and China in particular. Now, India's neighborhood is a very poor mix of opportunities and challenges. Historical and cultural linkages bind people of the South Asian region together. But sadly enough, people again get divided because of history and because of the pursuit of short-sighted goals. Now, Pakistan is a case in this point. It's the perfect example in this context, because I think even in the last session we talked about a lot about state-sponsored terrorism, some problems emanating from Pakistan. One of the most recent examples of this has been from February 5th, when the Pakistani embassy in Moscow observed the Kashmir Solidarity Day, maligning India, while it itself continues suffering from a massive economic crisis. Economists have been predicting its complete collapse without an external economic bailout. Pakistan has taken 14 loans from the IMF thus far, but ironically, none of them has ever been completed. Now, Pakistan may face a disaster like never before unless China or Saudi Arabia bails it out. The Pakistani rupee has plummeted to 250 Pakistani rupees against the dollar. The currency had to forego 12% of its value. The country's government has raised the price of petrol and diesel by 35 Pakistani rupees per litre. This is the situation in Pakistan. Now, just to add to the entire quagmire, there is China. Now, China continues propping up state-sponsored terrorism from Pakistan. It shielded 5 Pakistan-based terrorists last year from getting listed at the UN's 1267 committee. In addition to shielding Pakistan's state-sponsored terrorists, China actively aids and abets terrorism in India's northeast. Paresh Barwa is an example. Funsing Simrang is an example. In addition to this, there is China's debt trap diplomacy, as we've seen it happening already in Sri Lanka. Then there is Chinese frenzy in building ports encircling India, its violation of Indian sovereignty through the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, China's blatant disregard of border agreements with India, its escalation at India's borders, cyber warfare targeting India, the never-ending trade deficit with India. And these are just some of the several challenges which China as a neighbor poses to India. We have a star-studded line of panelists today to discuss these issues which India faces from the neighborhood. And we have Professor Burzine Waghmar, Major General Rajiv Narayan, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Mr. Alok Bansal, and Major General Dhruv Katoch in this session. Professor Waghmar, he is an inaugural Visiting India Fellow at RUSI and a faculty at the SOAS, University of London. Major General Rajiv Narayan has had 37 years of distinguished service in the Indian Army. He served as the Defense Attaché in the Embassy of India in Dushanbe in Tajikistan. Currently, he is a professor at IIT Madras, and he's a senior fellow and member of various research centers. Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, he's India's former ambassador to China. He's also served as the Indian High Commissioner. Currently, he's a distinguished professor at the Symbiosis International University. Mr. Alok Bansal, he's an author. He's a director of the India Foundation. Major General Dhruv Katoch, he's the director of India Foundation. So extremely star-studded panel, and we couldn't have better people to talk about the challenges which India faces from the neighborhood. Just a few housekeeping rules. Each speaker is requested to speak for 15 minutes. At 12 minutes, I will request you to please wind up. For the question and answers, I request participants to write your questions in the chat, and after the speakers have finished, I will read out the questions. So without further ado, I hand over the dais to the speakers. I request Professor Burzine Waghmar to kindly begin the speech. Thank you so much.
Good morning and thank you, Dr. Pathak. Anniversaries routinely concentrate the mind, and there is much to deliberate as India assumes the chairmanships of the G20 and SCO. The former is scheduled for September 2023, whereas at the time of writing, no date is fixed for the latter. This second annual security dialogue, co-hosted through the good offices of Mr. Pandya's Usanas Foundation and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, affords an opportunity not just to reflect, but recall Churchill that the further back you look, the further forward you can see. At least for the historian as I, who also derives comfort from George Orwell in these, what are truly Orwellian times, that a restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men everywhere. I hope to practice what I preach during the next 15 minutes. I hasten to assure that it will not be a sonorous, potted romp of events and personalities. At least I think not, and that my selective interventions repay consideration. So to the regional challenges faced by the Indian Republic 75 years on, and an overview. Partition was, insofar as I'm concerned, the only way out of that impasse. That the British wanted a united India is now amply attested in declassified documents and a more detailed reading of historical sources. The divide and rule trope, long a mainstay of nationalist readings, is simply untenable. What may have been pursued during the imperial era was ill-suited to London's post-war priorities, for in a united India, it envisaged a communist bulwark, access to an effective army which had only recently distinguished itself as the largest voluntary military force in the 39-45 war, and could be counted on to stabilize the Persian Gulf and Southeast Asia, a Commonwealth market for resources and finished goods in the Sterling area, and transit point to the empire's far-flung reaches, namely Australasia. Partition upended all that, but it was necessary to break the deadlock between both political factions. It became, quite rightly, clear to Congress to divest a portion of the Muslim majority regions to pursue effective governance. And the Hindu Mahasabha was correct in forcing Congress's hand in calling for a division of the provinces of Bengal and Punjab rather than relegate the status and security of all non-Muslims, not just Hindus, to fate, as Muslims would always be first among equals in an Islamic setting. Note also, for we often forget, that the 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan was acceptable to Jinnah because it contained a nascent Pakistan, which, a decade on, come 1957, was permitted to secede from the Indian Union. Just how was Nehru's India to bank upon the fealty or fickleness of those who could hold Indian unity and development hostage is never discussed by those who blame him for accepting partition at the behest of the Hindu Mahasabha. And the Muslim majority zones could decadally review if they wish to continue being part of India. Exactly how was India to function as this perpetually Damoclean sword loomed large, and merits noting, for nowhere in contemporary discussions does one find this salient feature invoked to remind both Indians and Pakistanis, especially the former, who have now become the fifth largest global economy. As for Jinnah and the canker of Indo-Pakistan relations, Kashmir, the following must be enumerated. On all three visits to the princely kingdom, 1926, 36, and 44, Jinnah expressed no interest in the region. That there was a groundswell of Muslim political consciousness there, as elsewhere for the Pakistan movement by the mid-40s, is not disputed. But Jinnah was reticent to actively cultivate the Muslim conference, as he did with other regional parties elsewhere across the Indian Empire's provinces. Time does not permit me to trace the antecedents of this kingdom, and the advent of Dogra dynastic rule with an intact Rajput genealogy drawn up with a little British cooperation by the March 1846 Treaty of Amritsar to establish their sway in this vast northern expanse of the subcontinent. Nor is it possible to contextualize this through theories of modernity and state formation. And there is a very banal reason for this. It is difficult to talk of it, quote, since there is no nation state to institutionalize the narrative of Kashmiri nationalism. Kashmiris have a fragile identity, as Nasreen Ali, British Pakistani academic in England, put it, because they lack an institutional panoply that would establish Kashmir and have failed to articulate a collective national identity because of the contested and divided nature of Kashmir, close quote. The rest, with the onset of the jihadists entering the kingdom and the First Indo-Pakistan War of October 47, is familiar fare. It established a mainstay of Pakistani civilian-military relations, which played itself out subsequently. Had Liaquat Ali Khan not been assassinated, he would have been ousted by Pakistan's first successful coup of 1951, not 1958, with Major Akbar Khan, organizer of the Pashtun jihadist Kashmir Raiders, assuming the office of state. Nawaz Sharif came begging to Bill Clinton in July 1999, seeking an honorable exit from Kargil and to save his skin for the military. General Musharraf, recently deceased, struck back 3 months later, October 1999. But what of that much-touted plebiscite and clamour for Kashmiri self-determination? Mountbatten flew to Lahore to discuss this with Jinnah on 1st November 1947. Jinnah, ladies and gentlemen, refused to entertain a plebiscite on the question of the Kingdom of Kashmir. He ruled it out, and Pakistanis would do well to respect their Quaid-e-Azam's wishes. The United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan, UNCIP, resolution of August 1948, and the principles of plebiscite, which were formally accepted by Pakistan in December 1948, demanded prior withdrawal of Pakistani forces for holding just such a plebiscite. A distinct obligation was expected of both warring parties. Pakistan was urged to withdraw completely, whereas India was under instruction to retain some security personnel to deploy a quantum of force on ground to assist local authorities in keeping the peace. Joseph Corbell, mentor to two American state secretaries, Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice, explained at length to Nehru that the UN's principles of plebiscite does not recognize either the Azad Kashmir government or so-called Azad forces. India's de jure position on the accession of the princely state was upheld by the United Nations. Not for nothing did Pakistan never mention the plebiscite in UN Security Council Resolution 211 following the Second Indo-Pak War of 1965 and Resolution 311 after the Third Indo-Pak War of 1971, or the similar agreement the following year. But most tellingly, it is the legal principle of rebus sic stantibus which clinches the Indian case. For international law maintains and provides for one party to be exonerated from a prior undertaking or obligation if there is a vital change in circumstances existing at the time of the obligation was undertaken. Material circumstances have altered considerably since 1947, which prevent India from exercising a commitment it held out in the first instance. Pakistan forced India to renege holding just such a plebiscite. It goes naturally to explain Nehru's address to the Indian Parliament, 27th November 1963, some months before his death, when he clarified, Article 370 is, quote, part of certain transitional provisional arrangements. It is not a permanent part of the Constitution. It is a part so long as it remains so, close quote. Rehearsing to what that percipient Pakistani, Hussein Haqqani, is what a Pakistan at 75 needs to be retold about the diminishing significance of the Kashmir is vital for Pakistan's economic survival hobby horse, which at least in the late 1940s and throughout the 50s was posited as the need to merge it with Pakistan. This is not to set any store now because Haqqani explains, quote, there has been no threat to the flow of river water into Pakistan despite Indian control of Kashmir, nor has the lack of access to the state's resources impeded Pakistan's economic growth. On the contrary, the case can now be made that the cost of pursuing the claim over Kashmir, especially through ever-increasing military expenditure, far exceeds any economic benefits Pakistan might get by extending its sovereignty over all of Kashmir, close quote. Sovereignty, and particularly that vexing question of water bodies, watersheds, brings me to the Sino-Indian imbroglio. My remarks here are restricted to Aksai Chin, which is tied up with Kashmir and the imperial defense of the subcontinent from Tsarist Russia. Be that as it may, it is plain London never defined it, unlike the McMahon Line and that contentious demarcation along the Assam Himalayas. The British infrequently made some claim to this wasteland, but from 1880 onwards did nothing to or bother to enforce their writ. Only an 1899 note can be adduced wherein Calcutta waived any claim to it. A clarification is in order as regards the Dogra dynasts, rulers of Kashmir since 1846, whose suzerainty never ever stretched all the way into Chinese Turkestan, today's Khotan prefecture in Xinjiang. What the then ruler did was dispatch in 1865 across the Karakoram Pass a small contingent to Shahidullah, a caravan halting place and garrison located on the lower bank of the Karakash River. 25 Kashmiri state soldiers were stationed here along 50 Kyrgyz nomads for additional support, merely to check marauders from Hunza, plundering and slaying traders who traversed between Leh and Yarkand. The Dogras abandoned Shahidullah 2 years later in 1867. The Chinese formally opened National Highway 219 from Kashgar via Aksai Chin to Tibet in October 1957. Indian intelligence had already apprised New Delhi of Khotan to Gargunsa mule convoys in late 1951, and again in a November 1955 report by one Brigadier Malik. A decade earlier, in fact during the war years, 1940 to 41, the Soviets had assisted the then Republican Chinese government to conduct a survey of those districts of Xinjiang bordering Ladakh. Those Soviet forays into mineral-rich Xinjiang were unbeknown to the British authorities, as pointed out by the late Karunakar Gupta. And those topographical maps published displayed the Karakoram Mountains as a natural frontier of the Dogra Kingdom, with Aksai Chin lying northeast. What started as a spat about Aksai Chin eventually led to a disastrous and entirely unavoidable war thousands of miles away at the other extremity of northeast India. Much has been said about Zhou Enlai's last trip to India in April 1960, where he proposed an Indian recognition of Chinese sovereignty over Aksai Chin in lieu of adjustments along the northeast frontier tract, today's Arunachal Pradesh. Zhou Enlai had even written to Nehru a year earlier, in January 1959, declaring a Chinese fait accompli of the McMahon Line, thus making a concession in the northeast for Aksai Chin, which was non-negotiable, given the annexation of Tibet in October 1950 and its geostrategic imperatives. The Chinese had reconciled themselves to the McMahon Line in the era before and following independence in 1947, and what had started with the British conquest of Assam following their victory in the First Burmese War of 1826. If politics is the art of the possible, then one can say that Nehru's India not only overstated its case on a purely legalist, moralist plank, which found accommodating Chinese objections intolerable. But what of the optics? The natural frontier remains fixed and the McMahon Line is not going anywhere. China tacitly recognized that when it came to
please wind up.
Its border in 1960, when Beijing relinquished claims over parts of Upper Burma's fertile Irrawaddy water region. Chinese skullduggery, however, in manipulating Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan to force weaker states to divest territory must be pointed out, lest one infers that the present writer is sanguine and regrets what might have been achieved a century ago. 2 points before I conclude. It is time Indian historians particularly, and Indians generally, still psychologically smarting from the tragedy of 1962, realize that what ensued in those fateful weeks of October-November 62 must also be refracted from the Cold War prism and the fast deteriorating Sino-Soviet ideological split after 1955-56. Mao was mounting an attack on Khrushchev via Nehru, which is a fact often lost on Indians. And in March 1969, he did just that during that brief Sino-Soviet war along the Ussuri River in Siberia. In his November 1986 state visit to India, Gorbachev made it plain that Moscow could not be counted upon during any future Sino-Indian showdown. Come 1987, Gorbachev seized the initiative to break the stalemate of the past 2 decades and took up the Chinese on negotiations leading to the first demarcation settlement in 1991, and both parties finally resolved all issues by 2003, including an additional protocol in 2008. Xi Jinping has not been half as voluble as Putin about India's decision to join the Quad, given that the latter had pushed for full Indian membership in the SCO. It is time India distanced itself from both, especially that toxic defense dependency partnership with Russia, which thinks nothing of conducting joint military exercises since 2016 with Pakistan. The fifth in that series just concluded in November 2020. The next 75 years, ladies and gentlemen, hold promise as India deepens its ties with Canberra, Tokyo, and Washington. And may this come not a day sooner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for giving us that excellent historical analysis. History is something that we can never really move away from. And as you correctly pointed out, some of the most interesting things in your speech, in the case of Kashmir, for example, the plebiscite actually demands the withdrawal of Pakistani forces. India was allowed to maintain some security forces. Pakistan at 75 needs to be retold that Kashmir has diminishing economic returns for Pakistan. How the spat about Aksai led to war thousands of kilometers away in the northeast. And one of the points which I loved the most was as to how Gorbachev said that Moscow cannot be counted upon in any future Sino-Indian conflict. So that I think still holds a lot of interest in the current international system, in all these discussions about what's going to be the future of international politics in the near future. So thank you so much for giving us your brilliant speech. After this, I would like to invite our next speaker, Major General Rajiv Narayan. Could you please take over?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pathak. Preeti, could you put up my slides? I have a short slide.
Yes, sir. I'll share it in a minute. Just a second.
Basically, I would not go down the historical path and look at it from a perspective.
Is it visible?
Yeah, but can you show it?
Yeah.
Slideshow. Can you go to slideshow, please? Yeah. So essentially, I am looking at it from the perspective that today, that India is a stable place. World and the global south especially is looking on India. In what was a VUCA world has already become a very tempestuous VUCA world, thanks to COVID and the Ukraine war. And what are the neighborhood challenges? We have always spoken about 2.5 front. Is it time to look upon it as 3-front warfare? Before I go into it, only one word to Professor for his beautiful exposition on history. One clarification from being a military man and having served opposite the Chinese. We do not now refer to 62 as much. We look at it from the prism of our firm standoff and repulsing the Chinese, both in 67 and in the Samdurangchu incident in the 80s, which actually led the Chinese to blink and go for the various agreements. And the only thing I would say is, as China's comprehensive national power increases, it tears up all the old agreements and goes anew. So post the Ukraine, as the previous session people had said that Russia's CNP may go down. It would be interesting to see how China deals with their agreements with Russia. Can we go to the next slide, please? Can we go next slide? Yeah. Now, basically, I'll be looking at what is the rationale for the challenges that are being faced today, the current immediate evolving challenges, what are the external and internal challenges that we face, and is it only from the north and west or anywhere else also? And what steps I feel, in my opinion, India should take to be able to counter these challenges. When you look at the Chinese perception, in the VUCA world, India is stable and rising, even as its own economy is sliding down. So this looks upon it as a challenge to its dream and its narrative, because a liberal, democratic, rising India challenges its own narrative that only an autocracy can enable a rise. And just yesterday, Xi Jinping has again underlined the same thing in his speech, that it is only an autocratic disposition which can enable the countries in Asia to rise. India has a rising stature in the global south. The latest Voice of Global South event that we took place, almost 120 odd countries have come up in support of India. And also the evolving decoupling where it feels that the bulk of the global supply chains currently located in China may come into India. So whatever it is going to do, it's going to do from these perspectives. What about the Pak conundrum? Dr. Pathak had mentioned about its problems economically. But before that, essentially Pakistan is controlled by completely in all aspects and all domains by the Pakistan army, beautifully brought out by Ayesha Siddiqa in her book, The Pakistan Military Incorporation. And it continues. So a peace with India is looked upon as an existential threat by the Pak army. It is not to Pakistan and the common man, as it would break its stranglehold on Pakistan. And that is the reason why it looks on India as an intractable foe. And you can look at it that you almost had peace with Nawaz Sharif and you had the Kargil war taking place thanks to late General Musharraf. And in the current moment, because of its economic decline, it will go to any length now to support China's strategy against India. Of course, it will take some money from it. And anyone else wanting to use its echo chambers or its ecosystems. I'll come on that a little later. Next, please. Next slide, Preeti.
Yes, good.
Okay. Now, I've just tabulated what are the challenges from the West. The biggest challenge I feel to India's security is a collapsing nuclear Pakistan, even as it is facing a new economic meltdown. And the questions raised by the IMF, while we all know about the prices and all rising, there are three things which have hit the deep state. A, it has reduced, it's asking for two things immediately, that 400 to 600 billion that it uses from the civil allocation as part of its pension to the Pak military to be subsumed in the Pak military. And it is, as a first step, the Pak military budget has to be reduced by 30%, and it wants all the last documents of everything to audit how those monies which have been granted to it have been used. And the second aspect is it wants all people, which is lieutenant generals and above, and all the bureaucrats to show their income tax returns. Now, these are certain things which is very difficult for Pakistan, for the deep state to accept. Hence, the current imbroglio and the standoff which is going on, which is between Pakistan and the IMF. If it was just raising, they can keep doing it. They don't bother about it. The biggest problem if this carries on is, will it survive as a nation or break up? Other is, will it survive and get Talibanized? West of Indus initially and then thereafter towards us. As long as east of Indus stays non-Talibanized, it stays as a buffer from this threat to India. What happens? Economic migrations. Will we face it? Or will the deep state hit out to survive? Where, with what, and with whom? When you look at the North, its economy is in a slide, and there are a lot of global headwinds against it. It has a growing threat of decoupling, which directly hits its stalling economy, and concurrently it is facing a demographic challenge. There are internal challenges to Xi from the public and Xi within CPC. And with the latest 4 bases that the Americans have signed in the Philippines, there is a growing fear of encirclement on its eastern seaboard. Now, the American reactions, once it places its boots there in those bases, will be very fast. Their whole calculation of how much time they have to launch goes for a 6. Now, does it look at the current environment as a threat to the continued rule of CPC, and especially Xi? The reason I ask is, whenever they feel threatened, they hit out. So will they hit out to divert attention? Taiwan, India, South China Sea, where? Because these will be in multiple domains. It will be a hybrid construct. You could face, like India could face, challenges along the LAC, in the maritime domain, in the aerial domain. We've just seen what happened with the balloon over US, and now it is flying over the Latin Americans. So my analysis is they might jointly present India with the multi-domain challenges using the respective echo chambers that they have developed over a large number of decades within India and the sleeper cells. They could also help others. Next slide, please. Preeti, next slide. Yeah. At the present moment, I expect the external challenge that is in the conventional or whatever domain, essentially from the north. In its current state, Pakistan is woefully unable, but it will do whatever it can in other domains to assist China. String of pearls and BRI, it is already there, but headwinds are here. So in the near term, how does it impose itself? Salami slicing attempts along the border with India is an option available to it, but we should also look at the aerial space, that is aerospace, and the maritime domains. It would use its three warfare strategies for anti-India narrative in the neighborhood, immediate and extended neighborhood. It will go to any extent to curb India's influence in the region. That is its aim, to isolate India, deny India and enhance space in the international arena, fora, and global south. Will it accept suddenly that India is getting so much of respect within the global south? The 62 war was not just about excision. It was also to cut our then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru to size, because he was leading NAM at that time, when he wanted to cut that to size to ensure that message is sent across to the global south that it is China they should look up to and not India. Today, can he do it? So he will use Pakistan as a cat's paw to target India. And our biggest external challenge is the collapsing neighboring economies. Pakistan is there to see. Nepal is facing a problem. Sri Lanka is facing a problem. Bangladesh is also facing a problem. Myanmar is facing a problem. Maldives is facing a problem. Yeah, in this budget, we have given out allocated amounts to those countries. But is that enough? What happens when they collapse? Same economic migration. Again, it poses security challenges for India. Next, please. Next slide. Now, these internal challenges which will come from whom all? Are they only from the north and west? I've already indicated China and Pakistan. But I have put a third, inimical powers. Since India is a balancing power at the moment, balancing Quad with SCO, BRICS, that is balancing both sides. It is looking at strategic autonomy of pushing towards its own strategic interests. So where the interests collide, where it collides, then you will have such pressures being put on us, and they will use not only their own, but the echo chambers given by the north and west to bring these pressures, to force you to try and see if you can change your policies. And the last point gives out that mislead politicians, intelligentsia, media.
Please wind up.
Yeah, just one more slide. Nothing surprising in what they do, part of Kootaniti, which Chanakya had said. So I have listed out the three-front threat, all the internal domain. It's a multi-domain. Earlier, it was not like this. It was limited. Today, because of the connectivity, you get these and interdependencies, you get this multi-domain threat. And it's time now we talk of a three-front threat. Two from both sides and one complete is an internal threat, and not just talk of half a threat. Next slide, please. Yeah. You need to be Sudhrid, Saksham, Samriddh, and Samrakshak to be a nation of something. Sudhrid means strong, Saksham means capable, Samriddh means economically prosperous, and Samrakshak, you become a net security provider. You cannot have economic prosperity unless you have a stable internal or are able to manage your stability in the internal and external environment. Our structures, our governance structures are based on the threats in the 20th century. I personally feel it doesn't suffice in the 21st century because the threats overlap. So you need a central coordinating authority, which may be the cabinet secretariat. You expand it. You need to expand your NSCS and NSA. They should be the ones to lay down the national security strategy and the national defense strategy. It's not necessary. It's up to the government of the day whether they want to put it in the open domain or not. But the people who are looking after the policy making and decision makers in India should have this. And Niti Aayog should be the place where the draft policies are made. So you get your internal and external security experts to discuss and see what tweaks can be done there to make sure that the execution is not threatened. You need to ensure your Atmanirbhar Bharat, because that is what will make you Sudhrid, Saksham and Samriddh. Okay. So the need is to revamp the all old policies. Concurrently, you have to use all your own tools to enunciate your own Bharat's narrative. What is a narrative? Need to become proactive on this. Use all data, media, entertainment, indices, reports, discussions, books, scholarships, etc. and create your own echo chambers. It's time now, as India is rising, you will get more and more such narrative warfares against you that you need to create your own echo chamber. And the last point, from the defense strategy, you got to create an integrated internal and external military strategy. From there comes your capability, and from the capabilities flow the structures. So this is what I have to say, that the internal challenges will continue to rise as India rises. Since you are looking at strategic autonomy, don't limit your focus only to the north and the west. They will be there, but other powers will also utilize these echo chambers to put pressure on you where our core interests do not overlap. And you need to relook at our structures. I have given my view on it. I'm sure there are other experts who can look at it to see that the overall structure of governance, not just the military or integrated military, the governance needs to be looked at again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really wonderful listening to that very crisp analysis of how a collapsing nuclear Pakistan, may get Talibanized, and that might be a problem to us. What about the security of its nuclear warheads? There are installations. What about economic migrations? In China, there's a stalling economy. There's the threat of decoupling. There's the demographic challenge. So all in all, it's a very difficult neighborhood for India to be in. And I absolutely agree with you when you say that India has to come up with its own narrative to show what our way ahead has been. So thank you so much for the brilliant presentation. Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, I request you to kindly take over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pathak. Thank you, Usanas Foundation, for inviting me to be part of this conference. I hope all of you can hear me loud and clearly. Dr. Pathak, I'm going to take just 10 minutes of the 15 minutes you have allotted to me. And the reason for that is because we have heard a historical perspective of China, Pakistan, and their threat to India. We have heard a military perspective. I'm going to talk about a geopolitical perspective, a more strategic perspective, a longer term perspective. And I have just a few points to make, so I'm not going to speak for more than 10, maybe maximum 11 minutes. So let me start by saying that when you look at geopolitics, when you look at international politics, over the last 40 or 50 years, the big trend, of course, has been the rise of China. So if you look at the period from 1980 to 2020, say, for example, that 40-year period, the defining geopolitical characteristic has been the tremendous rise of China, where China has grown by double-digit GDP growth every year for a 40-year period. And today she is close to being a 17 or a $18 trillion economy. The United States, which is the current superpower of the world or the largest power in the world, is roughly a $26 trillion economy. So the gap between China and the United States has reduced tremendously over these past 40 years. And roughly, if you look at geopolitics going forward, the defining characteristic of geopolitics, or the most important development in international politics, say starting 2019, maybe 2020, and for the next 40 years, is going to be this ever increasing competition between the two major powers of the world, the United States on the one hand and China on the other. So in the coming 40 years, 50 years maybe, geopolitics, international politics will be defined by this ever increasing competition between the two. Competition already exists. We all know that. We have studied it. But this is one of the important trends which is going to happen. Now, from India's point of view, we now find that we have a superpower on our border. And the problem with that border is that it is an undefined, undemarcated, undelimited border. We have a boundary problem, a boundary question with China, and that poses a lot of challenges for us. Therefore, as we saw in the summer of 2020, this big power, this new superpower on our border, can indulge in any kind of things, especially what we saw in May 2020 in Eastern Ladakh was what a lot of people define as salami slicing, and there can be no doubt about that. So the Chinese will pressurize us, that is India, on our unresolved border whenever they want to remind us of our own weaknesses, of our own sensitivities, of our own sensibilities. Now, to backtrack a little bit, because we spoke about what happened in Eastern Ladakh in March 2020, in April 2020 and beyond, continues even today. But before that, till 2019, the template in which India-China relations proceeded for the last 20, 30 years was that on the one hand, we would maintain peace and tranquility on our border, on our unresolved border or our undefined border. So on the one hand, maintain peace and tranquility on the border, but on the other, move ahead where trade, commerce, science, economic, and other interaction between the two countries is concerned. We also arrived at several bilateral agreements between India and China, particularly on maintaining peace on the border, because that was an important prerequisite for the rest of the relationship to move ahead. But in summer of 2020, when the Chinese moved large amounts of troops, large numbers of troops to the border with India in Eastern Ladakh, they violated many of these agreements which were aimed at maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. And so you have to ask yourself the question, why did the Chinese do so? What were the reasons that the Chinese violated those agreements and massed troops in Eastern Ladakh, and also conducted salami slicing operations in Eastern Ladakh? And there are basically two reasons that I think are pertinent here. The first reason, of course, is very simple, that they wanted to control territory which they claimed, but they did not actually control till that point of time in summer of 2020. But from my geopolitical perspective or narrative, the longer term reason is much more important. And that longer term geopolitical, geostrategic, long term reason for China having undertaken Eastern Ladakh is to show India that China is the preeminent power in Asia, and that India must realize this, accept it, and accept an inferior position to China in Asia and in global geopolitics. So this is the true nature of Chinese power. This is the true geopolitical reason for China having undertaken Eastern Ladakh. Clearly, what India did with its military reactions to Chinese attempts is not only to protect our own territory, which is the shorter term perspective, but from a longer term perspective, we also conveyed to the Chinese through our military actions that we do not accept the proposition that China is the preeminent power in Asia and that India will not take, we indicated clearly, India will not take an inferior position to China. So this is the magnitude of the China challenge to India. And the big question that begs us, and this is the heart of my presentation, what should India be doing? Now, there is very little doubt that the asymmetry between, say, India and China is huge at present. China is, if you use GDP as a measure, China is a $17 trillion economy, India is a $3 trillion economy. So there's a gap in not just GDP, but it also signifies that there's a gap in capabilities between our two countries. And therefore, I come to you with the suggestion that over the next 20 or 25 years, what India needs to do is to put its head down, focus domestically and internally, and ensure that it grows at 7%, 8%, 9% GDP growth per annum over a 20 or 25-year period. And if we are able to do that, we had 8.7 GDP growth, 8.7% GDP growth last year, 7% GDP growth in the year which ends on March 31. We have to keep that up over the next 20, 25 years so that the asymmetry between India and China, not just in economic size, but also in capabilities, whether it is military capabilities, whether it is scientific and technological capabilities, whether it is capabilities in the area of space or nuclear commerce, etc., will all reduce. So therefore, in the long run, we have to focus sharply on the mantra is economic growth, economic growth, economic growth. But of course, as we all know that in the long run, as John Maynard Keynes said, we're all dead. So what does India do in the short run? And in the short run, what India needs to do is to balance Chinese power by expanding its strategic partnerships or by creating stronger partnerships with countries like Japan, Australia, of course, the United States, France, UK, Germany, South Korea, and so on. And this is exactly what we're doing. The Quad is just one such example. So let me talk for a very few, because it shows how much importance I give to the China challenge and how little importance I give to the Pakistan challenge. But let me talk for just a couple of minutes on Pakistan. The fact that it is closely allied, it has an axis with China, is what troubles us because it presents us with a two-front situation, as General Narayan was saying. We need to be careful about that. But also, today, Pakistan's position is very, very dire. They are great survivors, so I have no doubt that they will survive this crisis too. They have. This is the 23rd time in its history that Pakistan is seeking a adjustment loan from the International Monetary Fund. They have done it 22 times before. This is the 23rd occasion on which they go. So I'm confident that they will survive this. But I think we need to ensure that the nexus between China and Pakistan does not get stronger. But let me bring my presentation to an end, Dr. Pathak, by saying that the real mantra for India over the next 25 years, where geopolitics or where diplomacy or where military preparedness is concerned, because all of it is tied up, is domestic and internal. And that mantra is economic growth, economic growth, economic growth. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful presentation. And I completely agree with your suggestion that the mantra is economic growth, and economic growth. China itself had done something like this when Deng Xiaoping had talked about hide your power, hide your capabilities, and bide your time. And it was only after their economic growth, consistently was double-digit growth rates, did they come out in such a huge way in international politics. So I think it's time we need to do that, so that we can reduce the asymmetries, economically, in the realm of space, in the realm of AI, the nuclear domain, etc. And I also agree that Pakistan is just it has just been propped up. So I think the greater focus should be on China. So thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful speech. I would now like to invite the next speaker, Mr. Alok Bansal. Sir, could you please take over?
Thank you, Sriparna. I think after such illustrious speakers, there's really nothing much for me to speak. But I would take, like Ambassador Bambawale, about 10 minutes to talk about these neighborhood challenges from China and Pakistan. And I think it's very interesting that I would focus primarily on Pakistan. But before that, I just say a few things about China, because it's very important that most Indians look at China in a binary, where we say that it's an enemy, it's against us, without actually going into the historical context. And I think Professor Burzine did highlight some of these issues which we need to understand. That unlike in 62, when we had an ideological conflict between a communist China and a democratic India, to my mind, today's China is communist only in name. So it is not an ideological conflict. It's primarily a border dispute. A border dispute which is extremely vexed, because it is not in black and white, that you cannot say that only we are right and they are wrong. It's actually, the dispute is in shades of gray. And I think once we appreciate that, we would have a greater understanding of this. Having said that, I think there can be nothing better than what Ambassador Bambawale said, that the best way of countering China is to grow, grow, and grow. And I think we need to grow. We are growing faster than China in this current financial year, but we have lost a decade. I think we have lost more than a decade. Our growth has not been as good as it was forecasted way back in 2001, 2002. I remember people forecasted by 2035 we would have come at par with China. That is nowhere on the horizon, actually. And China is growing. And I think we need to understand that unlike an average Indian who perceives China as an enemy, an average Chinese does not perceive India as an enemy. And this fact is important. So whatever animosity has probably towards India, it probably remains at the level of either Communist Party or the leadership or the military. But an average Chinese has no ill will towards India. This fact needs to be understood. We belong to the same cultural paradigm. We belong to the same cultural paradigm. We have the similar thinking to a very great extent. But it is a rising China which does pose a threat. So as far as I am concerned, I perceive Chinese perceptions vis-a-vis India as twofold. The first is that China does not want India to become an ally of the West as far as in an anti-Chinese coalition is concerned. And secondly, China doesn't want India to rise to such a level that it becomes a competitor for China on the global arena. And I think it is in these two paradigms that China looks at India and would like to do that. And as a result, it would not like to openly confront you, because that would push you directly onto the Western camp, which it doesn't want. At the same time, it would not want you to rise to be in a position to challenge China. And to that extent, it would keep engaging with all your neighbors so that you remain tied down to South Asia. So that's as far as China is concerned. When we come to Pakistan, I think there is of late a tendency, primarily amongst the defense analysts, to look down upon Pakistan, saying, oh, Pakistan is crumbling, Pakistan is dying. I think what we need to understand is that the conflict with Pakistan, as far as India is concerned, is an ideological conflict. And that ideological conflict between a secular India and a Pakistan, which is a byproduct of two-nation theory, will always remain, as long as Pakistan abides by the so-called two-nation theory, even if it's in name. Because these two ideologies are completely contradictory and contrasting. So as long as Pakistan swears by two-nation theory, we have a problem. It poses an existential ideological threat to a secular India and vice versa. Having said that, Pakistan is facing problems, and there is no doubt. And as I said, yesterday Pakistan's rupee official rate was about 276 to a dollar. Black market was 280. Yesterday, a Pakistani economic report came out which says that it will touch 290 by December. To my mind, it should touch 300 within this year. The Pakistan's economic crisis is not the first time it's happening, but it is the most serious that Pakistan has ever faced. If you see the way IMF has been negotiating with Pakistan this time, and I have been following Pakistan at least now for 20 years plus on a daily basis, I have not seen IMF questioning Pakistan in this manner ever again. I have not seen any details whether they've asked lieutenant generals to give IT returns or things like that. I haven't really come across because this may not be in the public domain. But the way they have looked at subsidies, the way they have looked at their funding requirements, the way they have looked at their petroleum subsidy, every single subsidy has been seen with a tooth comb, and Pakistan is having a problem. Now, if on 9th, IMF team goes back without an agreement, you would see Pakistani rupee touching 280, I think, on that day itself, if nothing more. So there is a problem. Pakistan desperately needs money, and primarily because none of its so-called friends have actually given him a firm commitment. Saudi Arabia has rolled over the money that is parked in the State Bank of Pakistan. UAE is also rolled over. China has also rolled over some amount. But Chinese have time and again shown that Chinese don't believe in giving aid. I think they believe in, at the most, giving loans or things like that. Because as far as the global giving index was concerned, China comes at the bottom of the list. We are not too high. We are also towards the end, unlike many Western countries. So China is not willing to give. The traditional supporters who would give money with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and UAE. And now with UAE gravitating more and more close to India, the amount of freebies that they can hope to get from both these countries, the UAE or Saudi Arabia, is actually extremely limited. So Pakistan has to do something. And contrary to what people believe, defense is still a very, very significant chunk of Pakistan's budget. But the largest payout is on debt servicing. And Pakistan's economy, after this, even if the IMF gives them a loan, is going to have a serious, serious dent. Primarily because the mainstay of their economy has been demolished very badly because of floods, coupled by this foreign exchange crisis. Because cotton production has not taken place. The textiles, which is the mainstay of their exports, is actually suffering. 65% of their industrial workforce is employed in textile industry. That is actually suffering. So economy is having a crunch. There is a political crisis because the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Home says we cannot spare forces to conduct elections. The President of the Republic is telling the Election Commission, give a date for the elections. The two assemblies are dissolved, which the election should be conducted in 90 days. The primary opposition is actually ready to take to streets, and the government, ruling government, doesn't want to conduct elections because they know they will lose the elections. So there is a political debate. And more importantly, there is also a very, very significant security threat, which is emanating from the Western Front. Because when Taliban captured power in Afghanistan, I think Pakistan thought it was their moment of victory. But it has come to haunt them because they did not realize that Taliban is primarily an ideological beast. And despite Pakistan's support to Taliban to bring it to power, Taliban would never ever ditch any outfit which professes by the same ideology as Taliban. And consequently, what we have seen is that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which many of its fighters fought with it, were provided shelter when Pakistan wanted them to be expelled. They said you can negotiate with them. They negotiated a peace deal, which has now crumbled. And today the situation is such that if you read Pakistani newspaper on a daily basis, you will see that every week there are at least 2 to 3 attacks on police stations, security posts all over Pakistan. Now, when the terrorists become so emboldened as to attack security posts and terror police stations, that shows the level of confidence that they have. The attack in Peshawar Mosque is very, very significant because it was a mosque of the police line. Please understand, the attacker, whoever went inside, the suicide bomber, crossed 3 security checkpoints and then reached there. And he had so much of explosives that the explosion was so loud that it actually broke the roof of the mosque, which crumbled. And most of the people died because of that. Almost 90% of the people who died, more than 90%, were police personnel, security personnel. So this shows that the Pakistani state is crumbling. Yes, then what? Now, if the Pakistani state crumbles, what happens? It will not crumble, as Ambassador Bambawale said. I also feel that it will tag along, but it will remain under pressure. Now, but with each passing day, what we are seeing is that the menace of radicalization is growing in Pakistan. The radical thoughts that have been affecting the society are now permeating inside security forces. Every major attack on security forces, there has been an insider collusion, be it in police, be it in armed forces, be it anywhere else. Now, what happens with this sort of a collusion is that you could at some stage on future see divisions within the security forces, and that would be a catastrophic event. Now, if this sort of a situation continues, Lebanonization of Pakistan is a feasibility. And I've always believed that Lebanonization of Pakistan is a dangerous proposition, because Lebanonization I define as a state when the external frontiers remain intact, but the internal actors become autonomous, not only as far as their interaction with one another is concerned, but also with external powers. If that sort of a situation happens, we'll have a problem. We've already had one occasion when there was a non-state actor firing across international border in Punjab. How would we react to that? We will have to work out our calibrated response. So Lebanonization of Pakistan is not in our interest. If at all Pakistan state's authority is crumbling, then we should help Pakistan to balkanize, because a neat balkanization of Pakistan is far more in our interest than a Lebanonization of Pakistan, because which could create chaos on our western frontiers. So with that, I think I would like to take, made my points. As I said, the threat from Pakistan has not diminished. It's an ideological threat, and that we need to be careful about. We will keep facing threat from China, because the border issue cannot be resolved, will not be resolved in near future. It's a very, very complex issue. It cannot be resolved in near future. Let that be very, very clear. So these challenges will remain in times to come. How we have to deal, we have to work out a way out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. And it makes perfect sense as to why China would want to tie India down to South Asia, because doesn't really want India to be an ally of the West and does not want India to be its competitor. So it works well for them if India just gets tied down to South Asia. Now, talking about South Asia, one cannot forget Pakistan, of course. And what's really interesting is the point that you made as to how, no one has actually given Pakistan a commitment to bail it out. UAE is gravitating more towards India. China is low, somewhere there, right at the bottom on the global giving index. So there is a problem, and we can definitely never completely sideline the threat we face from Pakistan, because, as you say, well, Pakistan has an existential ideological threat from secular India. I think Abhinav has a question on that in the chat section, but we'll come to that, when we are doing the Q&A. Now we would be moving on to the...
Just a small intervention. Just a small.
Yes, Abhinav.
I guess Captain Bansal has to leave at 1. So, I mean, if he's staying, then definitely he can take up the question later. But if he's leaving, then can I request him to take this question right now?
Okay. Major General Dhruv Katoch, I hope it's not too huge a problem. Could we just pose 1 or 2 questions to...
please do that. But please remember, along with Alok, I have to leave at 1 also. Both of us have got a similar commitment.
Okay. Abhinav, what do you suggest?
No, you take the question. Let him carry on.
Okay. So, sir, Abhinav has posed this question in the chat that, if India was not secular, then what? Would Pakistan still have a problem? would it still be an ideological threat?
Uh, uh, that's a very interesting question, and the fact of the matter is, yes, if India is not a secular, if it's totally a communal country, then I don't think so India would pose an ideological threat to Pakistan. Let that be a very frank thing, because if you see the Pakistan studies program which Pakistan has for students from class 3 onwards, the main thrust of that Pakistan studies program is to justify how India's secularism is a sham secularism, to justify creation of Pakistan, saying that how they could not have pursued their faith in a unified India. But having said that, let me tell Abhinav one thing. India is constitutionally a secular country, and secularism is a main ingredient of Indian constitution, which cannot even be amended now as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. Please remember that. So I don't see that possibility. But yes, I do agree that if India was not a secular country, it would not pose an ideological threat to Pakistan. Territorial threats and other threats would continue to exist. But yes, an ideological threat which exists, because today Pakistan's army considers itself not only the territorial guardians of Pakistan, but also the ideological guardians of Pakistan. Please understand, ISPR has come out with a statement saying that grant of MFN status to India, they have a viewpoint. Similarly, when Supreme Court takes a suo motu notice of Indian TV channel corrupting the Pakistani mind or things like that, this shows how seriously they perceive the ideological threat from India. So that is my personal view. Maybe people have different view. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just one comment which Professor Waghmar had was that, he agrees with you when you say that the Chinese retain no animus generally towards Indians, and the average Chinese remain plainly ignorant of the 1962 war, and that his or her country actually went to war with India. But for India and for Indians, it's a wound embedded in the Indian psyche. So just wanted to read this out. Now we'll have the last speaker of this session, and Sir Major General Dhruv Katoch, thank you so much for letting us pose the question first. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sriparna. Basically, I tend to agree with what Gautam and Alok have stated. So I will simply take off a little bit from there. I want to speak for about 2 or 3 minutes on China, then I'll spend about 5 to 6 minutes on Pakistan, on firstly on Pakistan, then China, and then conclude very quickly within about 10 minutes or so. I won't exceed that time. As far as Pakistan is concerned, it is no longer a conventional threat to India. That has been stated, and I go along with that. But it still remains a very viable sub-conventional threat, especially as far as terrorism is concerned. And regardless of the fact whether it is a strong Pakistan or a weak Pakistan, this aspect of Pakistan's policy has not changed. And there is one thing which people have stated, will continue to state that, okay, if Pakistan becomes strong or something, then India's problems will be less. I'm afraid they're barking up the wrong tree. The stronger Pakistan gets, the more will be the sub-conventional threat as far as terrorism is concerned. So let us take those blinkers off as a first thing. I will go with Alok. Pakistan needs to be balkanized if you wish to have security within India. That is one aspect. The nuclear threat per se, that bluff has been called, it is over. But how, the way I look at it, where is the real challenge coming from Pakistan? We know their economy is in a mess, etc., etc. Okay, we go with all that. But what is going to be the impact of instability? Now, one point which was brought about was that basically the problem with Pakistan is the control of the army. Well, that may have been true earlier. It is true today, but it is not simply because the army is controlling Pakistan. Basically, the whole society has got radicalized. So if anybody believes that if you take the army out of the equation, the politicians are going to be very good boys and take out a hand on friendship with India, it's not going to happen. And if you take the politics out, the people of Pakistan will support you as in a hand of friendship. I think the first thing India needs to do is to get rid of that delusion. Pakistan is a radicalized Muslim society, period. And you will never get to peace with this country simply because they are radicalized. So where is the threat going to come from? Captain Bansal spoke of the ideology. That is the threat. Because that ideology, we don't want it to permeate onto India's Muslims. And if that starts permeating amongst India's Muslims, then we have an internal security problem. So one of the problems which can emanate from that side, from an ideological Afghanistan and an ideological Pakistan, is the export of that ideology. The second problem, I have spoken about this about 8 to 10 years back, and people laughed at me actually. I have been speaking of it off and on, and this particular thought process of mine has very few takers, but I still believe in it, so I will give it out. You see, the problem with Pakistan is if it becomes, in my view, the biggest challenge will be what happens if there is a military come Taliban takeover within Pakistan. And you have a Talibanized ruling clique in Pakistan the way it was in Afghanistan. Now, that is a probability. Captain Bansal has very rightly stated within the forces itself, there are so many people who just, if you look into the north, into the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area, the soldiers are telling their officers, Saab, hum unse kyun lade? Wo to sirf Sharia chahte hain. Now, that, of course, is an excuse for cowardice also. If you don't want to fight a terrorist, then you simply say, okay, he's my Muslim brother, he wants Sharia, I don't want to fight him. But I think there are underlying radical causes also. So what is the threat, in my view, of a Talibanized society? We talk of economic migration. No, you've got a fence. We've got a fence all along the border. We've got a fence, even in the Kashmir area. It's a very strong fence because it is guarded. So people migrating this side on economic grounds? No, that's not going to happen. Something worse is going to happen. What happens in a Talibanized society where millions of men, women, and children want to escape from Pakistan because they don't want that life? And when these men, women, and children, old men carrying sacks on their heads and trying to get across through the nalas onto India, your BSF is there. How do we stop them coming? Because they have to be stopped. And in my view, that is going to be your security challenge. You cannot allow the refugees to come in. We cannot afford 1 million, 10 million, or 30 to 40 million refugees coming in, because those are the numbers which you will expect. So I feel, in my view, that is what you need to prepare for now. One, China. China, I'll go through very quickly. The threat has already been analyzed, but in my view, what does China primarily aim for? They aim for supremacy first in Asia and then the world. Now, who's the challenger? India is the challenger. So obviously, if you want that supremacy, so long as India is there, if you can't even be number one in Asia, then how are you going to be number one in the world? So what is China's strategy? Now, if they want to be number one, you have to dislodge India. And how do you dislodge India? In my view, you need control over the Himalayas. And why do you need control over the Himalayas? Because if you control the Himalayas, you control the waters of the Himalayas, which flow south. And if you control the water flows, you control everything. That is the fight for the Himalayas. That is why for very long they've been having that mission creep, as we call it, come 1 or 2 kilometers, go back half, then keep doing that over the years. Now they are being militarily addressed, but we have lost a long, long time. So the threat, as far as I'm concerned, is this mission creep, which is a very, very rare threat. And how it is to be addressed has been a challenge simply because of one reason. It has been a challenge because we have never built our infrastructure right up to what we call the line of actual control. That infrastructure is being built now. And as we keep building it, China keeps getting nervous. And that is the reason for the conflict. Okay. As far as the conventional war with China is concerned, I agree with both with Gautam and Alok. It's not going to happen. At least at the moment, it's not going to happen. But at some point of time in the future, in my view, it will take place. And when is that some point going to come? That point I can't determine, I cannot give you a date, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but I can give you a statement. That point will come when China feels it can win the war. So obviously, if they feel they can win this war, we don't have to worry about what all China has got, their entire thing. We only have to worry what they've got in the Himalayas, right? And in the Himalayas, if you can stop them, basically you require good satellite capability, good cyber capability, good missiles, at least the missile systems as far as China is concerned, they've got much more than us, but we've got adequate numbers as far as we are concerned to make it very, very expensive for the Chinese, and we require reasonable cyber capabilities. Here, while China may be at an advantage in all these aspects, in space, we've got the ASAT weapon, which will be a deterrent as far as China is concerned. Now, after this element of the warfare is over, the narrative building and all has been talked of earlier, I won't touch it now. The next aspect would be getting control over the skies over the Tibetan Plateau. And that is where the importance of a superior air force comes in. And as of now, the Indian Air Force is quite capable of giving much more to China than what they can give to us. The fight, please remember, is not going to take place over the Himalayas. It has to be the airspace over the Tibetan Plateau. That means from the Himalayan crest line, go 500 kilometers up. That is going to be the battle area. That is going to be the air battle space. So long as we can keep China down there, there is no threat of major military conflagration between India and China. Coming down to what we should do, Gautam has very clearly, very expressly stated, build up your economic capability. I think that is what we need to do, one. Number two, as far as the oceans are concerned, in the Indian Ocean, please have your alliances intact. The Quad, in my view, is a very, very viable option. And not just that, get the others also involved in it. We have great capability as far as the Indian Navy is concerned, and allied with Australia, Japan, and the United States, plus Indonesia at some point of time, and the others, the Philippines, etc., all joining up at some point of time, this will be something which the Chinese will not really be able to penetrate. So this, in terms of a strategy, I think this is what we need to do. I totally agree that there is a China-Pakistan nexus. We need to break it, but it's not going to be easy to break. So we will have to live with our enemies. And one final point before I close, in the event of hostilities taking place with China, it is going to be India's war. We will have to fight that alone. The West won't come to your help, except with perhaps intelligence or something like that. And in the event of our conflict with China, Pakistan may enter. But let us say we have a conflict with Pakistan, I will wager bets China will not enter. China is too smart for that. So that's not going to happen. So let us also be very realistic as to what is going to happen and keep going strong economically, but build your military capability. And what we are doing as in Atmanirbhar Bharat, as far as defense capability is concerned, in my view, that is the right way ahead. I'll finish now. I think I've taken just about 10 minutes. So, Sriparna, back to you.
Thank you, sir. And again, brilliant points, made brilliant points. And I agree that we need to get out of the delusion that a stronger Pakistan is going to be, well, a prosperous Pakistan, and maybe there's going to be greater bonhomie with India. It's radicalized, and the ideology is the threat. So we need to keep ourselves safe. If there is going to be a Talibanized Pakistan, a completely Talibanized Pakistan, there'll be a huge security challenge for India, because there'll be about 40 million refugees who would be wanting to escape and would want to come in. So that would be a problem for India, definitely. One of the points which I liked the best was, your closing statement as to how, if there's ever a war, with China, a conventional war, a full-fledged, full-blown war, Pakistan will join in. But would China really join in if there's a war with Pakistan? Definitely no, because China is smarter than that. So thank you so much, sir, for those wonderful points. In case there are questions, I think we have about 6 minutes before it's 1 o'clock. So in case there are questions to Alok Bansal sir or to Dhruv Katoch sir, I would take those first. I can see Abhinav's hand raised. So Abhinav, please unmute yourself.
My question is, not to any particular person. I mean, it's for all. Like, if anyone who wants to take this question up. So recently, I visited Arunachal Pradesh, and I had a chance to see the border posts and all. And I definitely agree with General Katoch. That in a proper conventional war, it is very difficult for China, like at this stage, to like have a clean sweep against India. And given the pace at which we are growing, even like the way our military capabilities are growing, it seems highly unlikely that China will engage India in a direct, proper conventional war. And Pakistan is certainly, collapsing, more like downgrading at a very rapid pace. So given this context, I would like to ask that this increasing acrimony and friction between the West and the China, and these new dynamics that are emerging, do they play to our interest? I mean, we have not been very anti-China, and even in the Russia-Ukraine war, we have not been very either anti-Russia or like very pro-US, but we have been just keeping a very principled and a balanced stand somewhere. So this rising rivalry between the West and China, does it play to our India's interest in the longer run?
Okay, I think since it's addressed to all the panelists, maybe since Alok Bansal, Rajiv Narayan sir, could I ask Alok Bansal sir and Major General Dhruv Katoch to answer first, because they need to leave, and then I come to the rest of the panelists. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that there is a tendency among certain people within India to project the rising tension between China and West, and especially after the Russia-Ukraine war. There is a tendency to project it as a new Cold War between democracies and autocracies. No, that's a very dangerous proposition, because then we would be in a Cold War where we will be in front line of the Cold War, unlike other countries which will be in the backyard. And I think that's not correct. We do have a border dispute, but it is, though it is not resolvable, but it is manageable. We don't really have an ideological conflict with China at this point of time. We have a same cultural entity. So I think the more there is a tension between China and Russia, the China will be more malleable to Indian viewpoint and would like to keep India on its side. And in fact, this was the situation, if you see, from 2014 till about 17, 18, we saw a lot of coming closer of India and China, a lot of bonhomie, but we know that any minor incident on the border can derail that. And that is, of course, a very important facet which we need to understand, that today it is not only the policy makers who are deciding the decisions between India and China. Any small ground level field commander can take a step which can vitiate the atmosphere and ruin the relationship. That fact needs to be understood, because facts would never be known what happens on the border. That would always be, then it will be hyper nationalism which will take charge and project your viewpoint against their viewpoint. So that is my viewpoint, that this increasing tension between China and West would see some amount of mellowing of that's my view.
Right. Sriparna, I'll just give a very quick comment.
Yes, sir.
The way I look at it is India has got separate interests as far as the Eurasian landmass is concerned, and a different set of interests as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. I don't think India is going to be too much bothered about what others are thinking, but as anything which is happening in the Eurasian landmass, we will look into what our interests are. And as far as the, as of now, if you're looking at the Russia-Ukraine war, that's a tribal war between two small European groups. It is not a world war thing like that. Those tribes are fighting. It doesn't concern me. So obviously, India is rightly kept out of it. And we have got a separate set of interests as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. I think India is not going to align with anybody if at all, India will align with India, and that is what the External Affairs Minister continues stating. Thank you.
Sir. Rajiv Narayan, sir, would you want to add something?
First, West versus China. Got to be very careful of what kind of support is the West going to give you in case of war. Like I club it with that if we had supported Russia also. Like in the war with Ukraine's war with Russia, West is fighting the war till the last Ukrainian standing or the last Russian standing. You don't see those open boots on ground. Same is the case is going to happen if you go down that line and you try to support them. That is the first point. Number two, I come to the larger issue, West versus China. The interdependencies on China of the MNCs are very great. If you look at how it evolved through the 90s, they supported the Chinese with billions of dollars of investment to help them create their infrastructure. That is how once the infrastructure was there, they needed China to come into the WTO before the MNCs could go there to gain their profits. And hence the Chinese were allowed to come into the WTO in 2001, not before that. Now, if you want to shift your dependencies outside, you got to look at infrastructure. So our own infrastructure is coming up. Though Chinese are worried about the decoupling coming to India, it will take a little while. Your whole Sagarmala, your freight corridors, all your highways that are being constructed have to fructify before anybody else can come in and say that, yes, I can go out from here. I have connectivity to the ports from where my shipping can take place. So that is what China targets. China's way of fighting a battle is very different. It's not the conventional way. It burns you from inside. It kills your CNP. It follows Sun Tzu war that the best general is one who has ensured victory before he joins battle. That is how that is why the multi-domain threat which comes from China, the ecosystems that they have created from early 2000s all over the world, it is to denude the CNP that when he comes to fight you, your comprehensive national power will not be able to stand up. He's not looking with a conscript army. I'm sorry, as a military man with 40% conscripts, you can't fight any modern war. It's just not workable. That's a different issue. Anybody who wants to discuss separately, I can tell. But 40% conscript soldiers, you can't fight any intelligence-ized or informationized warfare. There is a separate skill set which is required. He's kept it there. So it is this that is going to use to burn you from inside. That is how the Chinese are threatening you. And he wants to ensure that India is internally not stable, because then the Western countries, MNCs, will be hesitant to come in, because there's a lot of chatter which is coming out on LinkedIn and from the West that when they are going to decouple, they are looking at a stable and a secure environment. If he kills that, that's why I touched more on the internal dynamics, that if he kills that, then you're going to have a problem. So this West versus China is at the strategic level, geopolitical level, and the technology level, that they don't want to give them the latest technology and curb it by what is called the chip war. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Waghmar, would you want to add something?
I concur with Major Katoch. It is time India does not, with typical reticence and mild-manneredness, that is India's posturing, when it comes to the Quad, not want to militarize aspects of it, which Canberra wants to pursue. And Tokyo certainly is, since November, as you've seen, abandoning its post-1945 pacifist Japanese self-defense policy only. It is nothing if not significant that Taiwan has, of course, been talking about we are within China's ambit within the next 5 to 6 years after what has happened in Ukraine. But it is Tokyo and Seoul who are banging down Biden's door, Not Taipei so much, Dr. Pathak, but Tokyo and Seoul are banging Biden's doors. Damn it, do something. And you have to take a stand when it comes to Taiwan. Never mind us. They're not going to attack us, Seoul or Tokyo per se, but for Taipei. And Taipei has factored that in, and it has been an extremely instructive curve for them with what has happened in Ukraine. And there are voices within the Quad to bring in further, to strengthen and fortify defense relationships and capacity building, as you see it with the AS-UK Trilateral Forum, which was also set up between London, Washington, and Canberra. And I do wish, but the Indians don't want to do it, Dr. Pathak, because they don't want to antagonize the Chinese. Similarly, with this whole question of not, taking a stance, because they don't want to push Putin, a desperate Putin, a beleaguered Putin, already further into the Russian camp, into the Chinese camp. But like I pointed out, Gorbachev made it plain, we are not going to pull out Indian chestnuts out of the fire. And Khrushchev also did not support India in 62. Remember that in July, MiGs were supposed to be supplied to India. He reneged on that. They were never, and the 62 war did not see the Air Force in action. It was purely a land warfare operation. But in the 65 war and 62, India's mainstay was primarily British fleet of fighters. So it's important to realize that the Russians also will trim their sails according to the wind, and they're not your consistent ally or the only one true partner we've had down the decades. The Russians also know to play the game of strategic autonomy, and do not be so taken in or in hock to Moscow for such matters. Thank you.
Ambassador, do you want to add something?
No, I don't want to say anything more. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll quickly, pose these questions since we've run out of time. One of these first questions, and I'll just, paraphrase it, is basically about how, and this is from Ambika Bhargav, and this is about how, Pakistan continues its tirade of atrocities against Walods and other sorts of minorities. Why is it that, UNHRC and other guardians of global human rights, why don't they, talk about it? Why aren't they vocal? Why don't they take action? Ambassador, could I pose it to you, because they've not really mentioned as to who this is aimed at, but would you want to take it, since I think you have more experience in diplomacy?
I think that's a very good question. I think, you're not wrong in saying that, these issues are soft pedaled by the international community. I think what is important is that, they need to be pushed at the international level, and perhaps we should put together some organizations and so on which would push this in the international agenda as a whole. So maybe what you're pointing out is right, and perhaps someone needs to push this particular agenda.
So just to add to that, since the next question is also posed to you, but it's been written to me privately. This question is from Irfan Ulha, and he says that the question is to Ambassador, and he says that you sideline the threat from Pakistan, which is in a dire economic crisis, but an unstable neighbor is a much bigger threat, and it's much more dangerous than a stable neighbor like China. So what would you have to say to this?
Yeah, no, I'd only like to say that what you're saying is not wrong, Irfan. What you're saying is right. But, the conventional wisdom has always been that we cannot let Pakistan crumble, or we cannot let Pakistan fall apart or fall away or disintegrate. The point is that whatever we might want to do, it's, Pakistan is responsible for its own country. And, several of the people on the panel spoke about the deep crisis they are in today. And there's really nothing we can do. So we have to just wait and watch and see what happens, and move ahead from that. I think it's beyond our capability to try to put their economy together or to help them to put their economy together. That's for them to do.
Thank you. I see that Professor Waghmar has already answered Hardik's question in the chat. So there's just one last question, which is from Akshita, and I'll pose that to you, Rajiv Narayan sir. Is there an underlying reason behind India's request to modify the Indus Water Treaty? The treaty signifies the fact that the two countries can cooperate despite hostile political relations. So why is it that we are now talking about redoing the entire Indus Water Treaty?
The essential part is that there are two aspects to the Indus Water Treaty. I'll talk about the waters which are going towards Pakistan. The rest is with us also. Whatever was allotted to you, you're not using the full amount. That is the first part. And next part is you are allowed to have, especially in J&K, the run-of-the-flow hydropower plants. There are two run-of-the-flow hydropower plants that are to be constructed within J&K, which Pakistan has been objecting to. And that is the notice which has gone. It is not to redo or restructure the whole treaty as such. It is just for those two HPPs which are allowed to you in the IWT, which Pakistan and World Bank are dragging their feet. At one time, the World Bank accepts your point, and when Pakistan raises an objection, he accepts their point of view. So India has said, what are you doing? This is allowed in the treaty. Why are you even entertaining anything from Pakistan? So that is the notice that India has. People have started off, I've seen in the social media that India will change. No, this is what is there. In fact, even in the second part, the waters that are allowed to you within Punjab, Himachal, you're not even using it. There's so much of water which still goes through Suleiman Ke headworks and from the other headworks that are there. So much of water flows through. You don't have the space and reservoirs to utilize these waters. So IWT in J&K is for these two HPPs.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I see Professor Waghmar has his hand raised.
Absolutely right, Major Narayan. And Sriparna, what really is Pakistan's problem with the Indus Waters Treaty? I'll tell you this in a sentence, in a nub. It goes back to Pakistan's paranoia and neurosis with India. Sriparna, if you're a company, you are not going to release your balance sheet to one and all, unless, of course, the authorities ask you, who the hell are you to ask me what I have or don't possess? Likewise, the water is allotted, Pakistan gets its share, it doesn't complain about that. What it wants to know is how much metric feet does India have remaining in its reservoir after what uses and all. And India is loath to divulge those annual stats to them, and that cheeses them off no end. Why are you not saying there's something dark and diabolic and typical Hindu manipulative India is after us? You're not trying to show us the facts and this, that, and the other. And that feeds into their already conspiratorial mindset. That what is really, I've realized in at least my reading of the Indus Waters, that is what they keep getting. Tell us your figures. But India's like, you're getting your stuff. You're not objecting to it. Why do you want to know what I have or I don't have? It's none of your business. And point number two, what I really wanted to bring up on this question of Lebanization and Balkanization and the like, again, a little bit of history for one and all, and I'll wind up here. Please remember that Congress made it clear to London on the eve of partition, certain units are contracting out of the Indian Union. Should they fail to survive, they cannot be expected to return to New Delhi for rehabilitation or for resuscitation. If they fail to survive, they cannot come back severally, individually, say a Punjab or a Sindh or a Balochistan or this, that, or the other, to New Delhi to be absorbed into the Indian Union or to become part of the Indian Union thereof and to be set back on its feet again. It has to be jointly done, all the units that have contracted out of the Indian Union, namely the whole composite Pakistan, which explains why Bangladesh, East Pakistan, did not become an Indian satellite or surrogate in 71, much as many would like to have pointed out that India would swallow up Bangladesh. Of course, it did not, for the most banal of reasons, that East Bengali nationalism carried the day, and that's what Mujibur Rahman was fighting for, not to join the Indian Union. But it is instructed to drive that home, that India did not waver on its commitment given back in 47 during the transfer of power discussions. It did not swallow up Bangladesh. Bangladesh is feisty enough to give India a headache on issues as we've seen in the last 50 years, and it holds its ground. And good for Bangladesh to be sovereign and hold its ground and stand up to either a China or an India or anyone else it wishes to do so. But this is important to note that no provinces are ever going to come back into the Indian Union, because that was part of the arrangement with London. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
One last point on the water issue, I may add.
Okay.
Why Pakistan keeps asking India for what it is utilizing, what it is not, because it needs more of these overflows from India, which India is not utilizing because of poor water management within themselves. During the lean months, the Indus hardly reaches the Arabian Sea. There are many canals in my tenure in the West, on the Western Front, I have seen, which go dry. It stays dry. They don't have that kind of water because they have still stayed with the old architecture of the canals, and they have not even invested in dredging those canals because they are unlined or semi-lined. They don't even do the dredging. You don't do the dredging, then the water carrying capacity goes down, and the lined and unlined and semi-lined canals increases the water table around and reduces your arable land which is there, because if the water table becomes very high. So it is for these two that they are most worried, that if India starts using complete amount of IWT water that has been allocated to India, they will face a big problem in their agriculture sector. Thank you.
Dry as a bone, Major Narayan. Dry as a bone. When you take off from Bombay on Virgin 3S flight 355 to Heathrow, as I do, you depart northwest, you hit Nawab Shah, and then you take a left towards Balochistan and Makran and get into Khorasan and Iran. And throughout July and August on flights, because we depart from Bombay just after 12:55 in the afternoon, up to Nawab Shah, it's dry as bone, including that year around 2007 or 2008 when those major floods took place, not last year's more devastating floods. And I always said to myself, where is the water and where is the flooding? Dry as a bone from 33,000 feet on a clear August day. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the participants for giving your wonderful insights. This truly has been a very enriching session. Even I, despite the fact that I've been studying international politics for a number of years, there were a few of these facts which were very interesting to look back upon and bring them back into this current discourse which we have on the future of international politics and where India really stands. So thank you, Abhinav. Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, Usanas Foundation and the MEA for organizing this wonderful session. Over to you, Abhinav.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak, for the excellent moderation and for conducting this excellent session. And I would like to thank all the expert speakers, definitely a treasure house of knowledge, and they brought out facts and the understanding which, we were all looking for. My dear friend Burzine Waghmar and his treasure of history is always something, it's a delight. General Narayanan, you were spot on, while discussing what are the main challenges, and what we need to do. Ambassador Bambawale, your focus on economic growth. That is something that's a crux. Alok Bansal Sahab and General Katoch, definitely they're not here, but I would like to thank them for their excellent analysis. And now I guess, we'll just take a break for about an hour and 15 minutes. And our next session is at 2:30. That's a session in which we'll have some young and new voices on this, sharing their opinions on the emergent evolution of India's foreign policy. And so we'll join again at 2:30. I'll request you to come back at 2:30. And after that, we'll have one session again in the evening. That's on the narrative warfare, this narratives and perceptions, the information war, which India is facing majorly over the last 4 or 5 years. We've been facing that for last 250 years, but very with a great intensity over the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, so that will be in the evening. So goodbye till 2:30, and let's reconnect at 2:30. Thank you.
Preeti, you can... All of us as delegates and this panel, and may I please speak on behalf of all of us, thanks to Abhinav and Preeti for their yeoman's service, not just today, but in all the weeks leading up to what has been a meticulous, seamless webinar. Thank you very much. And to all those who work behind the scenes at Usanas Foundation, other staff members who I'm not aware of, and whose names I don't know, but thank you to all of them too, from all of us as delegates.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you, Dr. Pathak. And thank you for the
so
entire
much,
team of Usanas. It's been a pleasure to come once again on your platform. As always, it's very nice to hear different perspectives from different places, because that increases your knowledge about how people perceive things and makes your own perception a little more sharp. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am.